Let's jump right into something absolutely critical today. For decades, we've looked up at the stars and seen, this peaceful frontier for human exploration and scientific curiosity. But today, that reality is totally shifting. Space isn't just for stargazing anymore. It has actively become a domain for national survival. In this briefing, we're going to break down the rising weaponization of space and figure out exactly why building a robust space defense is now an absolute, non-negotiable imperative. And we'll be looking at this specifically through India's strategic lens.
I want you to just imagine this for a second. What happens if your entire country's GPS, banking communications, and military surveillance networks just vanish in a single second? Suddenly, the power grid loses its timing signals, ATMs are dead, and military commanders go completely blind. Terrifying, right? Well, this exact scenario is why we've got to completely trash our old mental model of orbit. We have to stop seeing space as this peaceful vacuum and accept the hard truth. Space is the active, invisible fourth domain of warfare, and the implications for both our daily digital lives and national security are absolutely massive.
So, to really master this topic, we're going to map out the threat landscape step by step. We'll start by looking at this new frontier of warfare, then zoom out to the global space arms race, and then zoom back in on India's specific strategic vulnerabilities. After that, we'll lay out the exact systemic blueprint needed for building India's space defense before finally bringing it all together with a quick recap to lock in what we've learned.
All right, let's pick things off with the first part of our analysis, the new frontier of warfare.
To really grasp how massive this shift is, just look at how fast the global baseline has changed. Back in the day, under the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, the focus was 100% on peaceful exploration. But as nations started realizing, hey, our entire modern economy runs through orbit, we shifted into a phase of military preparedness just to secure those assets. And today, we've crossed the threshold entirely. Space is an active battlefield. Now, India has this incredible, highly respected legacy of peaceful space exploration, but this new environment absolutely demands an urgent acceleration of defense programs just to survive.
Moving right along to the second piece of the puzzle, the global space arms race and mapping out these interconnected threats.
What's fascinating, and frankly a bit scary, is that adversaries are building capabilities that go way beyond just blowing things up. The threat matrix is totally multifaceted. Sure, you have kinetic warfare, anti-satellite weapons that literally smash into physical targets. But then you have cyber warfare. Hacking into satellite command systems is cheap and it's incredibly easy to deny. And don't forget passive-aggressive tactics, like intentionally creating clouds of space debris to physically block an enemy from accessing orbit. Seriously, a calculated debris field can cripple a nation's economy just as effectively as a direct missile strike.
And this leads us straight into a massive headache known as the dual-use dilemma. On one side, you've got this civilian guys, satellites up there for tracking weather, observing the Earth, or giving us internet. But flip that coin and you're looking at the military reality. Those exact same tools can be used for wartime targeting, gathering intel, and outright espionage. The line between civilian and military tech in space, it practically doesn't exist anymore, which makes it nearly impossible to tell a harmless weather satellite apart from a military spy tool.
Which actually connects to a huge disruptive trend happening right now. We're seeing private companies like SpaceX and Planet Labs stepping right into the middle of war zones, shaping modern conflicts by providing real-time intel and internet. This creates an unprecedented legal and strategic nightmare. Think about it. If a private company's satellite is actively aiding an army, does that make it a legitimate military target? The old rules from the 60s definitely don't have answers for this.
Okay, let's pivot and look inward. What does this unchecked militarization mean for India specifically?
The big concept you need to know here is the deterrence gap. Basically, this is the severe strategic vulnerability that opens up when a nation lacks the offensive or defensive space capabilities to match its rivals. And here's the crucial part. Falling behind against rivals like China doesn't just mean losing a couple of satellites. It means blinding your entire conventional military, your ground troops, your Navy, your Air Force, leaving them totally exposed.
And as you can see, this arms race ripples outward with a massive domino effect. First, it puts an enormous strain on the military budget because you're suddenly diverting funds just to keep up in space. Then, it completely disrupts the commercial space economy. Insurance costs skyrocket and critical data services are threatened. And finally, there's the environmental resource loss. All this weaponization and debris threatens to permanently block India from vital operational slots that it absolutely needs.
So, to close this gap, we've got to be honest about where the technological lag is right now. There are really three main deficits. First, a lack of space-based laser systems and directed energy weapons. Second, a huge need for advanced, jamming-resistant satellites that can actually survive electronic warfare. And third, a real gap in AI-powered space situational awareness, or SSA. Without these cutting-edge counterspace systems, proactively deterring modern threats is incredibly difficult.
Which brings us to part 4, actually building India's space defense. Recognizing the problem is one thing, but let's look at the actual blueprint to fix it.
You have to think of this as a strict sequence. You can't just start blindly building weapons. Step 1 is formulating a clear national space doctrine to publicly define the red lines and say, here's our deterrence posture. Once those rules of engagement are set, Step 2 is establishing a dedicated space command to centralize all surveillance and operations. Only after that can you effectively move to Step 3, boosting indigenous countertech, specifically focusing on cost-effective, reusable platforms like co-orbital ASATs and electronic warfare systems. And the only way to scale all of this effectively, you have to strengthen the entire underlying architecture. That means robust, real-time space situational awareness to track who is doing what up there. It means true institutional synergy, merging the brilliant minds at ISRO, the defense sector, and the fast-moving private startups into one unified engine. You've got to invest deeply in space-based cybersecurity and quantum comms. Plus, India needs to be actively leading the global conversation, building consensus so this arms race doesn't completely spiral out of control.
All right, let's bring it all together with a final recap to lock in what we've covered today. If you take absolutely nothing else away from this explainer, remember these 5 core pillars. 1. Space is undeniably the active fourth domain of warfare now. 2. The threats are way more than just missiles. They include cyber hacks and passive-aggressive orbital debris. 3. India is dealing with a severe deterrence gap that puts its conventional forces at major risk. 4. Fixing this requires a dedicated space command and a clear national doctrine, like yesterday. And 5. Long-term survival relies completely on deeply integrating civil, military, and private tech sectors. These are your core framework for analyzing any future geopolitical shifts in space. Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with one massive, lingering challenge. We know the 1967 Outer Space Treaty is basically obsolete for today's military realities. We know private corporations are launching thousands of dual-use satellites every single year. So the ultimate question is, who is actually going to enforce the new rules of engagement before this arms race spirals completely out of control? How the world, and India specifically, attempts to answer that question is going to define global security for the next century. Keep your eyes on the news, folks, because the future of warfare is literally orbiting right above our heads.